Hello, seafood friends. You're listening to Catch the Current, the coolest seafood podcast out there from the team at Undercurrent, bringing you everything from the boats to the boardrooms, breaking down the news, spilling a little industry fish oil, and sharing the sharp market insights you need to know. I'm Amanda Buckle.
And I'm Lauren Castiglione. We've got another tariff refund update for those looking to get back some of the money they shelled out under duties imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. U.S. Customs and Border Protection confirmed this week that it has processed more than $20 billion in tariff refunds.
I wonder if I will be getting any of that. So Brandon Lord, the executive director of CBP's Trade Programs Directorate, said more than 157,000 consolidated administration and processing of entries, or CAPE system declarations, have been submitted as of May 22nd, with over 108,000 of those passing file validation checks. The accepted declarations covered nearly 15.9 million entries subject to IEEPA duties. And of course, more than 8.5 million entries had already been liquidated or reliquidated without the duties attached. Now, CBP estimated that approximately $85 billion in potential and certified refunds had been accepted for processing through CAPE. And of that amount, about 20.6 billion includes duties and interest, had already been certified and transmitted to the U.S. Treasury for payment to importers. The agency also disclosed that more than 4,000 consolidated refunds had not yet been sent to the Treasury because importers or their authorized designees had not provided banking information.
Meanwhile, if U.S. President Donald Trump's goal with tariffs was to slow seafood imports into the United States, the latest trade numbers suggest it's having an impact. New trade data reviewed by Undercurrent this week shows the U.S. imported noticeably less seafood during the first quarter of 2026 compared to the same period last year, while exports actually increased.
The seafood trade landscape is shifting under the weight of Trump's global tariff strategy. Now, this all really started ramping up in 2025 when the Trump administration rolled out a broad 10% tariff on goods from most countries and then added even steeper country-specific tariffs on some major seafood suppliers, including India, Brazil, Vietnam, and Indonesia. Now, at first, seafood companies rushed to bring product into the US before those higher tariffs kicked in. Imports actually climbed during much of 2025 as buyers stocked up ahead of these increases. But by the end of the year, imports started falling, and that trend carried into 2026.
The tariffs have also become extremely expensive for the seafood industry. Since last spring, importers have paid billions of dollars in duties on seafood coming into the country, creating major uncertainty for companies trying to plan pricing, sourcing, and future business decisions. And even though some of Trump's tariffs actions have faced legal challenges, including rulings from courts questioning whether the administration had the authority to impose them, many of the tariffs are still in place while appeals continue. Industry leaders say that uncertainty is becoming one of the biggest problems.
At Seafood Expo North America in Boston earlier this year, executives warned that seafood companies may need to accept that higher trade barriers are here to stay. For example, Paul Jewer, CEO of Highlander Foods, said companies are now managing for a future where tariffs and trade restrictions remain part of everyday business. Meanwhile, National Fisheries Institute counsel Bob DeHaan described the constantly changing trade rules as kryptonite for businesses trying to invest or launch new products because companies never quite know what the rules will be from one month to the next.
When you look at which countries were hit hardest, India stands out. Seafood exports from India to the U.S. dropped sharply during the first quarter, driven mostly by shrimp. Indian shrimp has been especially vulnerable because of the high tariff costs attached to it. Overall, U.S. shrimp imports also declined, making shrimp one of the biggest contributors to the broader seafood import slowdown. Norway also saw a major decline, particularly in Atlantic salmon exports to the U.S. Tariffs, a stronger Norwegian currency, and higher freight costs all combined to make Norwegian salmon less competitive in the American market. Canada, however, appears to be benefiting from some of that shift, with Canadian salmon exports to the U.S. increasing significantly during the quarter.
China, another major seafood supplier, also experienced a steep decline in exports to the US. Tilapia was one of the hardest hit products, with imports dropping sharply as tariffs pushed costs much higher. But while imports are falling, US seafood exports are actually moving in the opposite direction. Exports increased during the first quarter of 2026, with China remaining the top destination for American seafood products. One of the biggest success stories was US lobster exports to China, which more than doubled compared to the same period last year. The second leading market for US seafood exports in Q1 was Canada, although both volume and value decreased. The two countries that made the most notable jumps in the amount of US seafood they imported during Q1 was South Korea and the United Kingdom.
Undercurrent America's editor Jason Huffman did a deep dive with all the numbers, charts, and graphs, and we've got a link in the show notes, so be sure to check that out.
Well, we said that shrimp imports may be down so far in Q1, but the Global Shrimp Council, or GSC, is making some moves that may change that.
For those not familiar with GSC, it's an industry-backed marketing organization created to promote shrimp consumption globally through collective advertising and consumer outreach campaigns. The organization confirms this week that it has secured its first sponsors for the next phase of its Shrimp More Often campaign as it prepares to roll out its first food truck in the U.S. aimed at boosting shrimp consumption. The initiative, first outlined earlier this year by GSC co-founder Gabrielle Luna, will involve branded food trucks stationed outside grocery stores, offering consumers free shrimp samples cooked on site. Social media influencers will also participate in the campaign by visiting the food trucks, purchasing shrimp from nearby stores, and recreating the dishes at home for online audiences.
They're positioning it as more of an experience and part of a broader push to increase global shrimp consumption through consumer-focused marketing efforts. And while the initial focus remains on the US, the organization said discussions are already underway regarding possible future expansion into European markets. GSC is looking for additional seafood companies to participate as sponsors in what is described as a scalable international campaign intended to unite the shrimp industry behind consumption growth initiatives. I think it's cool, but I hope they're able to partner with the retailer to feature like all the ingredients needed to cook whatever recipe they're serving. Because that's always my problem is like I'll be missing a crucial ingredient when I get home. And then I'm like, okay, well, that recipe's out the window. We gotta just have
Right. Make it easy for us.
yeah. Just give me the whole thing in my basket. And also they shared a mock-up of the truck and it's eye-catching, but I also feel like maybe a missed opportunity to somehow turn it into like a giant shrimp. Maybe make it compete with the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile,
The Shrimpmobile
or perhaps maybe the crustacean cruiser.
or the Shrimp Shuttle.
Maybe how about the prawn patrol?
There are plenty of options, so keep your eyes and shrimp peeled for the GSC food truck.
Moving along, I recently had the opportunity to talk to a familiar name in the US seafood restaurant world, Roger Berkowitz, the former owner of Legal Seafoods, who has launched a new restaurant concept. Not a big full service dining room, but a much smaller footprint in one of the busiest travel hubs in the country, Boston Logan International Airport. Lauren, next year we're not driving to Boston, we're flying. It's a roughly 700 square foot space in Terminal A, built around familiar seafood staples like chowder and lobster rolls. But the strategy behind it goes beyond just serving travelers in a rush. Berkowitz, who sold his family-owned Legal Seafoods chain in 2020, a brand that now operates about 25 locations across 4 states under PPX Hospitality brands, he told Undercurrent that he never really intended to leave the restaurant world entirely behind. Instead, he described a broader plan that started to take shape after the sale, what he calls a 3-pronged approach, which is e-commerce, retail, and physical locations. And that strategy first took form in 2023 with the launch of Rogers Fish Company, an online platform focused on frozen seafood and prepared meals. From there, it expanded into supermarket soup sales, including at Market Basket, the New England grocery chain with roughly 90 stores. And those products include like clam chowder, lobster bisque. Now, the airport concept adds a new layer here. And Berkowitz says that location is very intentional. He said airports offer something traditional restaurants don't, and that's scale and visibility. And he said that helps to grow e-commerce traffic and build an organic customer list. But underneath the branding strategy is a more serious shift in how he thinks seafood restaurants need to operate. Rising labor, utility, and supply chain costs, he says, have fundamentally changed the economics of full service dining. And in his view, many restaurants responded the wrong way by simply raising prices. And at the same time, in some cases, compromising on quality. He added that especially after the pandemic, that dynamic created what he sees as a diminishing return where customers were getting less value than they used to. And his answer is a model built around efficiency, and that includes smaller spaces, lower overhead, and a tighter menu, but still anchored in premium seafood. So, of course, I had to ask him about rising lobster prices. So, take a listen to what he had to say. Do you foresee a price where the lobster roll is no longer on the menu, or do you think that an airport is still a place because people are still thinking of it as like a summer treat?
Yes. So that's a very interesting question. I thought when the price of lobster again continued to, go higher and higher, there would be, sort of a saturation point where people said, no, I'm not going to go. That's really not the case, that we're finding at the airport. Now, certainly the airport, has folks with discretionary income and discernible palates so that, it's less of an issue for them. I suspect what I'm hearing from people is, in general, is that, they like lobster rolls. They may not order it or have it as frequently as they once did, but they're not going to deny themselves the opportunity to have it. So from my vantage point, what I'm looking to do is making sure that A, I'm priced, 20, 30, 40% cheaper than full serve restaurants, and certainly street pricing for people doing lobster rolls. So I have to be a value. The other value proposition is that I use fresh meat. And most people, right now, when the price spikes, are using frozen meat as one way of mitigating the spikes that seem to be taking place. But, my feeling is if I've got to be authentic to what I'm doing, I'm going to have fresh meat out there.
He mentioned those folks with discretionary income are those that are buying lobster rolls. And that reminded me of this other story that I saw this week at this year's Bottle Rock Napa Valley Music Festival in California. One of the hottest food items wasn't barbecue, tacos, or pizza. It was a $34 lobster caviar corn dog. So the corn dog, created by St. Helena, California restaurant called Understudy, is stuffed with lobster, fish mousse, and herbs, and then fried and topped with a remoulade and caviar. And according to reports, demand was so intense that festival goers audibly groaned when the booth officially sold out on the third day of the event. And they sold over 4,000 lobster caviar corn dogs.
Well, I'm going to have to add that to our seafood, eat food road trip bucket list, Lauren.
Let's do it. Now, before we go, we've got some exciting news for Undercurrent subscribers. Undercurrent has officially launched the expanded U.S. wholesale Chilean sea bass price reporting, which now includes frozen fillet assessments alongside our whole fish and portion coverage. This launch further strengthens Undercurrent's growing global seafood pricing portfolio across salmon, shrimp, ground fish, scallops, octopus, and specialty seafood markets.
Well, that does it for us this week. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you back here next week.
Bye-bye.